I got to go to Harvard, and it was a surreal experience as a first-gen low-income student, and I made sure to take advantage of as much as I could while I was there. And one of those things was learning Spanish. I wanted to see what secrets this ancient and famous university knew about language learning that the rest of us didn't, and I knew that if there were any secret tactics or cheat codes to languages at all, then surely they must be here. And I was going to find them. So now that I've learned Spanish and passed the C2 mastery exam, I wanted to take a trip down memory lane to share what it was like learning Spanish at Harvard and the interesting tactics they use there, in the hopes that maybe you can borrow some of these strategies and resources to advance your own learning in Spanish or in another language. Our story starts out in freshman year. I must have been the most eager freshman in the history of Harvard College. I had moved from Haiti as a kid, gone through normal public schools, and we struggled financially growing up. So getting to this place that I had seen in movies as an opportunity to change life for you and your family if you worked hard was like Charlie getting a golden ticket to the chocolate factory. I wanted to learn from every professor, meet every student, try every club, and say yes to every opportunity. And one of those was Spanish. I had always viewed being able to speak multiple languages as a real-life superpower, so what better place would there be to learn than in supposedly one of the best educational institutions? So I grabbed the student handbook, jumped straight to the language section, and spotted what would become my college goal. It read, Citations in a Foreign Language. It said that we could study an ancient or modern foreign language, and they'd award us a foreign language citation that would be added to our transcripts, included in graduation, and given to us alongside our diplomas. College was completely foreign to me, so I had no idea what any of this really meant, but it sounded like a good goal, and I knew that I wanted to learn Spanish. So I said that whatever I needed to do, one way or another, I'm getting that Spanish citation. But this was challenged right away in the very first semester. I knew that although I did well in high school, I probably hadn't been exposed to as many fields as some of my other classmates who came from much better schools and opportunity backgrounds. And it wasn't a choice for me to leave college being employable. I was going to have to take care of a lot of people after I graduated. So classes like Computer Science 50, Foundational Chemistry and Biology, Intro to Medicine, Law and Ethics, and Math had to be in my transcript that first semester. I did like all of those subjects, but I was equally or even a bit more excited by Spanish. But I decided that I had to make a tough call and put Spanish at a lower priority. There are many problematic things with this thinking, but this is how I handled the trade-offs and pressures at the time. So freshman fall, I ended up having zero Spanish while I learned how to college and handle harder classes than I was ever used to. And I took a beating in that first semester, especially in computer science, but I fought back, put the hours in, and made it through freshman fall. Then came the glorious freshman spring. After getting better at strategizing and running the sprint of college in the first semester, I was finally ready to take my first Harvard Spanish class. I started with a class called Spanish 30, 4 countries and their cultures. It was taught fully in Spanish, and this is the actual syllabus from the class. The aim of the class was to get us to improve our speaking and writing, along with reading, by studying a bunch of texts, articles, and art about contemporary topics in Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. So in essence, the approach was to learn the language by getting deep into the culture and discussing or debating real topics that affected people. We used Gramática Esencial by Rojas and Curry as our grammar book, but in class, we read texts like Crónica de una muerte anunciada by Gabriel García Márquez, talked about art related to Mexico from Frida Kahlo and the British painter Leonora Carrington, read about the discoveries of the Mexican archaeologist Eduardo Matos Moctezuma, saw the Peruvian Earth documentary Los Ojos del Camino, and dug through news articles every week about one of the 4 countries. And we often had to write about these sources on the spot with zero help or computer use. So this ended up being one of my first Spanish writings in class, and I got shredded for it. Safe to say, I was struggling with Harvard Spanish. I was pouring all of my time into my STEM classes, and I reserved little energy for Spanish. The thought even crossed my mind to just stop Spanish and focus on STEM. But I loved the language, and I was determined to keep going and get better at it. It also did help my practical optimizer brain that language was a requirement to graduate from Harvard. The handbook stated that all degree candidates must demonstrate proficiency in a language other than English. And that was one of the first language lessons I took away from Harvard. Language learning is valuable enough to prioritize. As I pushed myself to be practical in college, I was often tempted to think that language learning is a fun, nice to have that will soon become obsolete due to technology. But Harvard seemed to recognize that even with the technological advancements that the university itself was helping to lead, the benefits of learning a foreign language, from cognitive to cultural to functional and more, are valuable enough to urge every student to do it. So whenever my brain wanted to argue that language learning was a nice to have, the Harvard graduation requirement kept me in check. But I could tell that I was going to need much stronger Spanish skills if I wanted to get that citation, which takes us to sophomore year, where things really began to heat up and I learned my second lesson. By sophomore year, I had 2 semesters of college under my belt, and I felt much better prepared to juggle medicine, computer science, and all the other challenges of university along with Spanish. I was pretty set on becoming a doctor then, but I was also discovering many career opportunities that I didn't know existed before. I dabbled in consulting, finance, statistics, started doing ALS biology research, launched a nonprofit startup to help high school students get scholarships, tried music, and many other things. Some of these didn't feel right for me, but others began to open my mind to many potential futures that I could pursue. So I stayed committed to finishing my medical requirements, but I also promised myself I would take classes and do clubs in other fields to keep exposing myself to new things. And with that, I reaffirmed the value of giving Spanish a spot in my limited transcript. So in sophomore fall, I dove into my first advanced Spanish class, Spanish 40, Viewing the Hispanic World. Similar to Spanish 30, this class was taught fully in Spanish, and it focused on learning the language through culture. We studied films and texts from the 20th century and onward that spanned Spain and Latin America, like the Colombian Panamanian film Los Colores de la Montaña, lighter texts like Los Astros y Vos by Uruguayan novelist Mario Benedetti, the film No about the Chilean dictatorship of Pinochet, and the Mexican Guatemalan film La Jaula de Oro. And there was no hiding in this class. You'd lose points if you missed class, you'd get docked if you didn't participate enough, you usually weren't allowed to use a computer, and then you had written assignments, oral evaluations, final projects, and quizzes. For grammar, we used the book Manual de Gramática as our core resource, but we'd spend most of the class practicing Spanish through cultural resources. The grammar, we mostly did it in our free time and through corrections in our writings. They give us this for writing. Any accent, article, conjugation, verb tense, or other mistake would get called out, and we were challenged to refine all aspects of our Spanish writing. My writing was getting better by year 2, but I knew that I would need a lot more practice. So I came back for more, and in sophomore spring, I geared up for Spanish 50, Creative Writing and Performance. And I realized something special about Harvard language classes. A lot of my early college courses, like Computer Science 50 or Regenerative Biology 10, they were sometimes in these big lecture halls with hundreds of other students scratching formulas and equations to keep up with the lecturer. But Spanish was taught entirely in small sections with maybe 10 other students, so it always felt like a warm and friendly environment without as much of the university pressure. In all, Spanish 50 was quite similar to 40, but we went much deeper into writing and focused our cultural lens on theater and performance. We kept using Manual de Gramática for grammar, but for the main text, we read plays like La Muerte y la Doncella by the playwright Ariel Dorfman and La Casa de Bernarda Alba by Federico García Lorca. Spanish 50 was actually really fun because we eventually got to do class performances where we'd recite the plays and act them out as a fun treat. And that was the second language lesson I picked up from Harvard. Languages are best learned alongside studying the cultures. Grammar is important, but the classes I took pushed us to practice it through cultural texts, films, and debating topics. It almost felt as if we were learning Spanish as a tool to understand culture rather than focusing on the language itself, and this oddly felt right to me. So by the end of sophomore year, I was feeling pretty good. I had survived 2 full years in college, been through 3 Spanish classes, I was making strides in computer science and biology, and in the background, I was deeply involved in music with my a cappella group. I was getting the hang of consulting with real clients from a student group I joined, and I felt like I was finally balancing working hard, exploring new fields, and appreciating college. Then my tower came crashing down junior year. I expected that junior fall was going to be tough, but I was still not ready for what I got. In the fall, I stacked up on organic chemistry and some stem cell and biology courses. I took a leadership position in my consulting work. My startup was beginning to pick up and go through a bit of funding, and it quickly became the hardest academic semester I've experienced ever. I made the mistake of seeing organic chemistry as just another chemistry class, and I quickly fell behind. You do not want to fall behind in a class like Orgo. There were 5 hours of lecture and class learning each week, weekly problem sets that got pretty tough, and a few big exams that pushed you to know the chemistry like the back of your hand. I paid the price for falling behind. Exam 1 crushed me, and I realized that I would fail the class if I didn't make substantial changes. So I sacrificed the rest of the term to that cause. I essentially moved into my residence library called The Cube, and from morning to night for the next several months, it was me, lecture notes, and a desk lamp. Friends didn't see me, social life didn't exist, and I made the call to pause Spanish. I put my head down and followed a strict schedule. Wake up, review chemistry, go to classes, do chemistry problem sets, consulting work, run startup meetings, recruiting applications, midnight gym session, more chemistry, finish other class assignments, breathe just for a second, and then sleep and repeat. It was an extremely difficult semester, but I bit down and kept at it, and I slowly began to climb back up in organic chemistry. For the challenge that junior fall was, the work was worth it, and everything started to fall into place. Grades turned around for the better, clients were happy, and I became a team lead in my consulting job, and I gained the confidence that I could handle any challenge that college threw at me after that. With that confidence, I gave another push at Spanish in junior spring. In that semester, I signed up for a study abroad program at the University of Sevilla in Spain, and I went abroad for 6 months. This was the very first time I got to focus on Spanish without having 6 or more other academic priorities up front, and I wanted to take advantage of that. I made a promise to not use a single word of English in my entire 6 months in Spain, and I committed to doing and thinking absolutely everything in Spanish. When I landed in Spain, my writing, listening, and reading skills were not too bad, but speaking was my biggest weakness. So I spoke every day in Spanish, broken and slow at first, and then my Spanish got better until I could have conversations with other people, make friends, and really build some incredible memories in Sevilla that I hold to this day. That's where I picked up my third lesson: prioritize the language and speak it as often as you can. The Spanish I learned in Sevilla was the same that I was learning in the classroom before. The main difference was that now I actually got to use the Spanish every day for hours at a time, and this made all the difference. By the time I left Spain, I was really comfortable with conversations in Spanish, and this is something I had never been able to do before because I couldn't really prioritize the language. So I think that making Spanish the focus for a time and consistently speaking it every day really accelerated my learning. As I left junior year, Spanish transformed from a challenge to a joy, and by senior fall, for the first time, I felt a sense of ease in college. I took on many of the same responsibilities that I did as a junior, but all of a sudden, they felt a lot lighter after having beaten the challenge of junior fall and then rested in junior spring. So in that first semester of senior year, I added on Spanish 59 to try and finish my citation. Spanish 59 was focused less on learning the language and more on using Spanish to volunteer and help the community. They had us use our Spanish to go and support a local organization, and since this was the COVID year, many schools were suddenly short on translators, so I volunteered to help a local elementary school keep their Spanish-speaking students on track. Apart from volunteering, we did also squeeze in a few films in class like Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America, and Speaking in Tongues, a documentary about the value of being bilingual. And that took us to the very last semester of college, and I had fun with this one. I took Spanish 81, table talk, and food writing, and it was all about exploring Spanish through food culture in Spain, and the class normally involves cooking real dishes with the professor. But since we were still in virtual classes, we had to do the cooking solo at home. Still, I had a lot of fun using Spanish in this more playful way to cook for my housemates and connect with the language through food. And that's the fourth lesson I picked up. Have fun with the language and use it to help people. The volunteer work I did and then the food culture class I took both brought me back to this playful and curious state that I had as a kid when I first decided I wanted to learn Spanish. And they reminded me why I had fallen for the language in the first place. And yes, before finishing senior spring, my last step was to visit my resident dean, and I finally got the Spanish citation right before graduation. So that's my experience taking Spanish classes at Harvard, and many of the lessons, resources, and techniques they taught are available for anyone to use to learn a language that you like. And if you get stuck at the speaking stage like I did, then check out this language app I built to solve that problem and make it easy for anyone to practice speaking Spanish to become fluent from wherever you are in the world. So I'll see you there, and hasta la próxima.